All right, Alex, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so let's start with an icebreaker question, my friend.
Okay.
What is your current favorite food in March
Oh,
2021? I know it's
uh,
really hard.
that's a great question. I'm really into, I know this is like so crazy. I've been really into oatmeal lately. I don't usually like oatmeal, and I will say that like I know, and it's taken me so many years to like it. But I don't usually like it. But anyways, my son loves it. And so I've been making it every morning. And I feel like I finally have perfected it enough where I'm like, oh, I actually enjoy this. And it's not this like mushy food that I have been so adverse to for so long.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So do you have any like little tips and tricks? This is what I think when my husband makes the oatmeal versus me, he doesn't put enough water in there. And I'm
Oh.
like, dude, you got to put enough water in there to make the oats like really like creamy and
Creamy and
gelatinous,
delicious. Yes.
right?
So my sort of two things is, well, I was like, I love oatmeal when it's downed in like maple syrup, but I'm trying not to do that in the morning. So my trick is I take a super ripe banana and like mash it in, and that gives it really creamy texture, but it also gives it so much like natural sweetness. And then I also stir a little bit of peanut butter into it too. And then my son loves frozen, like the frozen wild blueberries. So we do a lot of blueberries in it too. So it's good. It's like finally a bowl of oatmeal that I'm like, oh, I get it now. Like this is actually a delicious, enjoyable breakfast. So yeah, that is my current favorite food.
Yum. It's like a granola bar in a bowl, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yes.
Amazing. Okay. So let's dig into a little bit about a plant forward life. I want to know about where you started your journey into a more plant predominant way of living.
Yeah. So I've never been a huge meat eater. Growing up, we didn't eat a ton of meat. Ironically enough, my dad is a really big hunter. So that was really sort of like the only meat that we ate a lot of when I was a kid. And even then I didn't really like it. So I sort of say that I've never been that into it, and it was a lot easier for me to sort of step away from it. Around high school, I started experimenting with vegetarianism. I don't actually know if it was just like when I think back to that period, I don't actually know if it was because I was trying to be rebellious or if it was just sort of a natural not liking it. But I definitely remember like sort of experimenting with it and talking to my mom about it. And she was like, whatever, like you teenager. So enter college, and I started dating this like, I mean, for a lack of a better word, this meathead. I mean, he was really into like bodybuilding competitions, and he just ate like so much meat, and I was so grossed out by it. And we had this, this breakup. And I just remember like the next day I woke up and I was like, that's it. Like I'm not eating meat anymore. Like I needed almost to like have this like breakthrough moment. I know that sounds so silly, but it really was like this catalyst of being with this person who like just ate so much meat. It was never something I was that into. And then it was like this separation. And of course, I was studying nutrition. So I was learning more and more about it. And it just sort of had this natural, like, aha moment for me. And yeah, I mean, that was well over 15 years ago. And I haven't really eaten meat since. And then from there, I kind of, stepped more away from dairy and from eggs. I call myself predominantly plant-based. So I would say that I eat plant-based most of the time, but when I'm traveling, or if there's, we go somewhere and there's like eggs or cheese or something in the meal, I eat it and I'm fine with that. So yeah, that's sort of been my evolution. And then of course I had children, and that sparked sort of a whole new reintroduction and reignition, I guess, into the way I was eating and really how I wanted to raise my kids.
Awesome. Wow. So it's kind of been an unfolding, but you did have like that moment that was like, that's it, which I feel like a
That's
lot
it.
of people do, especially not just with like eggs, dairy, and fish, but it's mostly about meat. There's usually something that's like, okay, that's it, whether it's a documentary or somebody that you've been around a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
that
and
it's
I
just like,
think
that's it.
I think it was always like under the surface. Like I think I had wanted to be this way, really, like I said before, like in high school, I was experimenting with it. And then it just was like this break of like, oh, I'm so viscerally turned off by this idea of like eating this meat. And obviously it was related to a person, but I think it was just like simmering there. And I needed that permission and that break to be like, yeah, this isn't what I like. I don't really like this feeling when I eat it. This isn't really how I believe as far as my like, ethics are concerned anyways, is eating these animals. And so, yeah, it was just sort of this perfect storm.
Mhm.
Um, and then yeah, and I think, the more I just keep learning over time, it's like a realignment of like, oh, yes, yes, good. Like everything
Mhm.
is just like reaffirming what I want and what I believe.
Yeah. I grew up with a father who was a fisherman as well, like
Mm.
professional fisherman. And um, I remember as a little kid, I was like, no, but the fish like are feeling that, like
Ah,
I had some compassion, like a level of compassion at a really early age. And then now it's just even more so. And I just
it's
got
more
done watching
heightened.
Seaspiracy, which was a phenomenal film if you haven't seen
I
it yet.
haven't seen it. Yes.
I know that you've been super busy with other things, which we're going to get into now. So, okay, you and Whitney are you do plant-based juniors. This is
Mhm.
a whole like facet of what you do, but you guys just wrote a new book. Tell us about
Yes.
it, all about it.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah. So the book is called The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler, and it's really that. We when I was pregnant with my son about 4 years ago, I really was like, okay, I've been eating this way for a while. I felt really confident in what I was doing, but I think like a lot of parents, or when you become pregnant for the first time and you're responsible for someone else's life, like you start questioning things. I think it's really natural, and I started questioning, is this correct? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I getting the nutrition that I need? And I was just finding the evidence-based section of what I was trying to look for really hard to find. Like the books that were out there were by celebrities, or they just had a lot of like misinformation in them. And so I just felt like, oh my gosh, I have 2 degrees in nutrition, and this information is hard to find for me. I imagine there are other parents out there in a similar boat. And Whitney and I had been friends for a while, and she was also pregnant, and we were, talking to each other back and forth, and we were just like, okay, we need to put this information out there. So I really say that this book is what I was looking for 4 years ago. It's got everything that you want to know about raising your children, either exclusively plant-based or even just a little bit more plants. I truly believe that we can all do better when our kids eat more plants, even if it's not exclusively so. I think that there is so much data that talks about how important introduction of foods are in the first few years of life, and how much that sets up for, how our habits are as we enter into our own adulthood, and the choices we make around food. And, there's unfortunately statistics that show just kids are barely eating enough produce. About 1 in 10 get enough. And so I think that the more we can push for an inclusive, more plants on the plate message is really sort of what we're about. So there's information for really all aspects of wherever you fall on the plant-based spectrum. And then of course, lots of recipes. And then we also talk about introducing solids and, sort of specific things that you'll want to think about when you're raising sort of that infancy to toddler, picky eating, how to introduce sweets. We really sort of say it's the comprehensive guide of, if you have a question about feeding your kids those first few years, especially when a plant forward or plant-based slant, this book is for you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, it's so good. And I hear you when it comes to like having information for raising a plant-based child. I've been strictly plant-based for over 10 years, and my almost 4-year-old son
Mhm.
now was you're right. Like I looked at Alicia Silverstone's The Kind Baby
Yeah.
book, but really I ended up doing all of my own research and making
Yeah,
sure that he was getting, the right omega ratio and all
sure.
of the things, because it isn't information that's put out there. So like this is incredible that you guys have this book, and I will refer every new mom or every mom to be to this book, because they need to have it right at their fingertips, all of their questions answered in one spot, so that they're not a stressed out mom. They're not,
Yeah.
you
I mean,
know,
there's enough to deal with. I mean, gosh, especially those first few years of life. I mean, there's so much coming at you. And I also think that it's hard to know where to turn. I mean, I love our pediatrician, but she's not well versed in plant-based nutrition. Even the questions I was asking her in the beginning, it just really became apparent, like, okay, I'm going to look to you for a lot of things when it comes to raising my kids, but when it comes to the nutrition aspect, especially plant-based nutrition, and that's not necessarily her fault. It's just not where she's studied. And so I feel for parents who are like, I don't know who to ask. And so we really were trying to be like, look, this is all the information that we feel like is important and that you should consider, because there are things to consider. And I will also say that's true for raising any child, regardless of diet. It's not like if you just say, oh, they're omnivores, they're going to get everything they need either. I think it's really important to consider nutrition, whatever diet aspect you're coming from.
100%. So let's get into that a little bit when it comes to, when a mom gets pregnant, regardless of what they are consuming dietarily
Yeah.
or their eating patterns. But then also for plant-based, what do you suggest when a woman gets pregnant to look for nutritionally?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that they want to consider. Obviously, we think about macronutrients, right? Especially towards the end of pregnancy, calories are going to ramp up, protein's going to ramp up. We talk a lot about protein in a plant-based diet. It is not hard to get enough protein, but pregnancy, I feel like, is one of the few areas that you just want to make sure you're consuming enough of. And of course, protein is found in so many plant-based foods. It's not just your beans, legumes, tofu, seitan, tempeh. It's also found in whole grains. Oats, like I was talking about earlier, oatmeal. Oats are actually a fantastic source of protein. So lots of foods contain it, and just ensuring that you're eating as many whole foods, plant-based foods as possible is going to get you as much as you need. The other things we want to consider are things like iron. Iron needs increase dramatically during pregnancy, because not only are you ramping up your own blood stores, but you're also responsible for that little baby's as well. And so, iron is less bioavailable in a plant-based form. That's easily gotten around by combining it with a source of vitamin C. So if we take something like black beans and add in salsa to it, you're going to increase the non-heme iron by about 4 to 6 times. But, those needs increase, and you'll definitely want to ensure you're getting enough. It's actually fairly, I would say, difficult to get all of your iron needs, whether you're plant-based or not, just through food alone. You'd have to eat, I think it's something like 6 steaks a day, or 6 cups of black beans, and no one's doing that. And that is why our prenatal is so important, because it also contains a little bit of iron to help you sort of meet that recommendation. Other things that are really important are folate. One of the benefits of a plant-based diet is that it's really naturally rich in folate. And the reason I feel like we talk so much about pregnancy and folate is that because a lot of women do not know they're pregnant until perhaps, week 5, week 6, week 7, and sometimes even beyond that. And really, folate is so important when it comes to that spinal cord, that neural development. That happens in those first few weeks of life. And so ensuring that you get enough folate in your diet really helps to make sure that spinal cord is going to close correctly, that, all of the sort of neuro benefits are going to be completed the way they need to be. And then, all the other trace nutrients just increase a little bit more, which is why we really encourage just, doing what you can in pregnancy. And I say that because I was so sick with my son. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm going to have this beautiful pregnancy. I'm going to eat all of these like abundant salads. And I mean, I could barely keep anything down. I was so sick the first 20 weeks. And, thank God for supplements. Thank God for my prenatal. I really knew that I was at least covering my bases as much as I could through supplements without having to rely so much on food, just because I couldn't. So, giving yourself the grace that you need, because pregnancy is funky and weird, and there's so many GI issues sometimes that happen. So we get that too.
Totally. So that brings me to my next question. Is there something specific or specific things that you think that should be in a prenatal? Maybe if you feel comfortable dropping brand names or anything like that, like what is the best that you have found?
Yeah, I have yet to find a vegan prenatal that meets all of the requirements that I'm looking for. We actually have a free supplement handout on our website, plantbaseddinners.com. None of it is sponsored or affiliated. It truly is just like, it is a minefield when you are trying to look through all of the supplements out there and figure it out. And so we try to make it as simple as possible. And the reason I say it's so difficult is, one, the ones that I found that are close to meeting the marks of what I would consider usually do not have a plant-based source of vitamin D. And so we really try to only recommend brands that are completely vegan, completely plant-based. So I will sort of say that caveat, that does take a lot of the options out there out of their running. The biggest thing is going to be B12. So we hear a lot about B12, and it's important to know too that B12 from supplementation and B12 from food sources are different in how they're absorbed. B12 in food is combined to a protein, B12 in supplements are not. That makes a big difference when it comes to how they are absorbed in our body, how much intrinsic factor we need. And so you'll see things like recommendations for pregnancy are about 2.6 micrograms. Well, that's really easy to meet. And you'll see a lot of prenatals will say 2.6 micrograms. That is not going to be enough, though, when it comes to the supplementation level you need. The research that we've done, we like higher levels. We used to say 25 micrograms per day. We actually feel more comfortable with the higher level at about 150 micrograms. This is not hard to get if you're taking a separate B12 supplement, but just knowing if you're a plant-based mom out there, or even someone who doesn't eat a lot of animal foods, if you're looking at that prenatal, you're likely going to need more B12. The other thing that's hard to find is DHA. DHA is really important. DHA accumulation ramps up the first few years of life and also in pregnancy. And DHA is what we consider to be a preformed omega-3. So what that means is that in normal adults, we can convert ALA to DHA. The conversion amounts really kind of differ depending on your bodies and lots of different factors, anywhere from about 1 to 10%. But only preformed DHA is what crosses over to both the fetus and also in the breast milk. And so that's why it's really important to either get it in the diet or get it through supplementation. Well, DHA is found, yes, in oily fish, but oily fish also come with a lot of other things, right? That what pregnant women are trying to avoid. It comes with usually higher intakes of mercury, dioxins, other kinds of pollutants. And so I don't necessarily feel comfortable telling pregnant women to increase fish consumption, but I do feel comfortable saying DHA is important. What we know about DHA when it comes to cognitive and retinal development is really important. So ensuring you're getting it through a supplement. Usually you're not going to find the amount you need in also a prenatal that covers all the things you want. And so taking a separate item is usually probably a better bet.
Got it. Yep. And that was one of the things I was going to ask you about. It was my next question, actually: fish and pregnancy and toxins and DHA
Yeah.
supplements. So yeah, I definitely took a multi, and actually
Mm-hmm.
great question, because I just not that long ago, maybe 3 years ago, found out that, it's not necessarily an a plant-based source that the vitamin D is coming from. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
the animal D is
And I will
more
also say
Mhm.
the formulations change all the time too,
Mhm.
So we've talked to companies where it's like, you used to have a vegan version, we promote this one, and then supply chains, change and prices change, and then they switch. And I know it is so hard as a consumer to be like, wait, you changed your formulation. I've been ordering this for you for years and you didn't tell me. I mean, I feel so much because I know it is so difficult to be like, I just want to find this. I want to make this so simple and easy. And unfortunately, sometimes it feels really overwhelming to kind of find that perfect supplement.
Yeah, for sure it is. So, covering all the bases is better than not. That's for sure. I used
Yes.
to be somebody like a purist, that would think I didn't need supplementation, and that I was going to get everything through food. But I think that you for sure, made it super clear, especially during childbearing ages. I mean, when
Mhm.
you are pregnant, it's no question you need to be supplementing. And unless you're literally spending your entire life making a perfect diet, like, it's not a good idea to not supplement. So finding a good supplement that works for you is super important. All right. Next question. What recommendations do you have for moms when they are pregnant that cannot kick the nausea? I know that you were sick for 20 weeks.
Mm,
I was sick for 20 weeks. I didn't go back to yoga till week 25. It was bad.
it's hard. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing I will say is really giving yourself that grace and that permission to be like, my body is obviously responding this way. Fighting against it or trying to like push through, I think is such a mentality that I had, and I don't think it's necessarily healthy. We are nauseous, we are sick in a sense for a reason, right? Our body is trying to tell us that we want comforting foods, we want really rich in carbohydrate foods because we're trying to grow. I have to believe that sort of it is a condition to keep us away from, perhaps bitter foods or foods that may have contained poisons. A long time ago, we didn't have, when we weren't sure, we needed to keep ourselves as healthy as possible. So I think the biggest thing is to find grace. Supplementation, I think, is essential for a lot of things, but especially in pregnancy. And so making sure that you're taking that prenatal in whatever form. If you can't keep the actual supplement down, there are some powders out there that you can mix into things. The one thing I could drink often was smoothies. And sort of that was my one way to be like, okay, I'm going to get some nutrition through here. Cold foods tend to do better with nausea than hot foods. And, allowing yourself where you can. Again, I really had a hard time with anything raw, but I could eat things cooked. I could eat things blended into a smoothie. I could not do a salad. That was not until well into the second trimester before I would actually like stomach a salad. But I could try to get it through in other ways. And hey, if your day is nothing but English muffins and bagels and you take your prenatal, like it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Thank God for steps again.
Exactly. And
There's
one other just quick
yeah.
thing I want to say about supplements, because I think sometimes this is such a like 4-letter word, or we think like something must be wrong if we supplement. And I think that it's really important people to understand so much of the American diet, especially, is supplemented, and you don't think it is. So, for instance, we fortify a lot of grains with folate. Our milk is added with vitamin A and vitamin D, cow's milk. A lot of other plant-based milks, of course, are also fortified with those nutrients as well. Iodine is either found in iodized salt, or actually the biggest source of iodine in the American diet is dairy, and that's not because dairy naturally contains iodine. It's the way that we clean the udders and sterilize the equipment, and that iodine solution gets into the dairy. So even if you think that you do not take a quote unquote supplement, you're still fortified. You're still enjoying the sort of the benefits of fortification and supplementation. So I think that when we say things like you don't need a supplement, well, perhaps not 200 years ago, we were eating a lot of soil and things were different. But if you want to be completely plant-based now, you do. And it's nothing that's wrong with the diet. It's just adapting to sort of, our current life. We don't live our lives completely outdoors either and naked, or at least sun exposed, for a couple hours a day. And so we don't get the vitamin D that we need. Vitamin D in a supplement form is a very okay option unless you're really spending time abundantly in sunshine.
Totally agree. I love it. Yeah, all the things to think about. So, okay, so now that we've gotten through nausea, we've had a baby.
Had our
Not
baby.
everybody has nausea. Thank the Lord. But for those who did, we've got through that.
Yes.
We had the baby. Now, let's talk nutrition during breastfeeding, because to me, I actually focused more and I ate a lot more during
Yeah.
breastfeeding than I did when I was pregnant. So, how does that
Yeah,
look?
I think that is a surprise for so many women that you think like pregnancy is going to be this time when you're just eating abundantly, and you may, especially towards the end, although your stomach is so smushed and you feel so uncomfortable. I feel like I was never into eating a ton, but oh my gosh, breastfeeding. I mean, I would wake up in the middle of the night and just be like starved. And of course, you're producing so much energy for this sweet little baby. I mean, you literally are the fuel that is keeping your child alive. And so it's of course natural. All of the things that we talked about in pregnancy. So iron, not necessarily iron, folate, calories, protein, DHA, zinc, selenium, all of those sort of micronutrients, B12, are going to continue to ramp up and be important in breastfeeding. The one thing that changes is unless you had a pregnancy or a delivery, I should say, where there was some blood loss, you likely don't need as much iron. And so you can cut back on that. And then your DHA needs are actually going to increase. So for pregnancy, we say about 200 milligrams a day, but in breastfeeding, you want that to be a little bit higher, around 300 milligrams a day. I tell all my breastfeeding moms that, snacks are your lifesaver, I think, because I feel like you're just so busy. I did a lot of like one-handed smoothies, one-handed little like, oat balls I would make and bars, because you just feel like you need like constant energy throughout the day, and hydration. I mean, I think it's like 16 cups of water to sort of have an adequate milk supply. That's a lot. And that's likely more than you're used to drinking. So just really encouraging hydration, of course, calories, protein, fat, but then, just ensuring those micronutrients are on point as well.
Awesome. Okay, so for those moms, because this is totally possible, that cannot breastfeed or
Sure.
have a hard time doing so, or whatever it might be, maybe they're going to daycare, whatever. Um, what do we do about formulas? Have we found a optimal plant-based formula for those that aren't using, breast milk from a milk bank or pumping? Um, what does that look like now?
Yeah, and I think it's something like 75% of women at some point in the first year use formula. I had a lot of struggles with my son as well. I have IGF, and so I was able to breastfeed, thankfully, but I was never able to produce a full supply. And so I think that formula gets this stigma, especially in the plant-based community and sort of the quote unquote natural mama community. But I think we should also say that formula is not poison. We have come a long way when it comes to formula. Formula is a safe option for your child, and there should be no guilt or shame around finding nutrition for your child. So I think that that's really important to sort of say that I support whatever decision is best for that mom, because yes, there are so many factors that get in the way. Unfortunately, so many of us do not have that like support system that we used to, and we don't have the time, or we're not given the time whether it's, to work or going back to work early, or, whatever. So formula is not poison. A few things to consider. One is there are a few plant-based, there's soy options on the market. So there is, if typically when you're looking for a formula, there's going to be cow's milk based and there's going to be soy based. I am not aware of any other option for plant-based or other alternative that is specifically designed for infants. There's a lot of toddler options out there, but those are not nutritionally equivalent to infancy. So you're really looking at cow's milk or soy milk. And also know too that even if you are planning on not introducing cow's milk to your child, not every baby does well either with cows or soy. And so we talk to a lot of vegan parents who will say things like, my baby had a really terrible reaction with soy milk, soy formula. And okay, we have to get through this first year too. We have to do what we have to do. So if your child isn't reacting well to that soy formula and you have to go to the cow's milk option, even if you weren't planning on doing so, I think we really need to be very accommodating and understanding that, there's not a ton of options out there and we have to do what we have to do. The other thing that I hear a lot from parents is they'll look at the ingredient list on a soy formula and they'll say, oh my gosh, it contains brown rice syrup or it contains corn syrup. I don't want these sweeteners. And what we have to understand is that human breast milk is very high in something called lactose. That's the milk sugar that is in breast milk. Breast milk is very high in carbs. It's very high in fat. It's actually not that high in protein, as we might consider. It's definitely not as high in protein as, say, as like a cow's milk will be. Well, if we take that cow's milk, we can formulate it into a formula to be just containing enough lactose, because cow's milk contains enough lactose, enough carbohydrates that we can alter that. But a soybean does not. Soybeans are not super high in that carbohydrate. And so in order to make it nutritionally equivalent to a human breast milk substitute, we have to add in added sweeteners. Well, unfortunately, there's not a ton of options out there. I think there's some issues with brown rice syrup. There's obviously some issues with corn syrup. And so I also think that there's no such thing as a soy milk formula that is not going to have some type of added sweetener to it. So there's nothing wrong in choosing that option. We have to have enough carbohydrates to grow a baby. The other thing you'll see sometimes too is added fat. Again, like I said, human breast milk is very high in fat. It's actually very high in saturated fat. And so in order to sort of mimic this, we have to add in different types of oils, which is why you'll see on the canister things like coconut oil, palm oil. Again, we need to get that saturated fat up.
Got it. And you found a brand across seas for yourself, is that right?
I did. Yep. I ended up using a European based option. But I also say that in the way that, like, there's a lot of access issues and cost issues that everyone needs to be, considering for themselves. I'm not a huge fan of saying this is sort of the perfect brand or the one that I prefer, because again, I know there's a lot of formula is expensive. And for a lot of parents, it is an expense either they weren't planning on incurring, or, it's more than perhaps they thought of. And so I just think it's really important to say, whatever formula your baby tolerates and whatever you can access and afford is going to be the best formula for you.
Got it. Love it. And I also love that you took the time to go and find something that fit you, and that
Yeah.
fit your standards. And sometimes, yeah, going that extra mile or sourcing from far away is, to find what really works for you is fine. But I love how you were touching on both points, you found that for you, but then also accessibility for everybody else is important to acknowledge. That's for sure. Okay.
Yes.
So as we are moving on with the food for babies, what do you think about rice cereal for babies?
Yeah, lots of things here. So, rice cereal used to be recommended very heavily, right? And I'm thinking back to like 70s, 80s, 90s. It was sort of considered like the perfect first food. And the reason I will say too that rice cereal was so highly pushed is, one, it's hypoallergenic. So, again, a lot of our nutrition thoughts and beliefs and research have changed. And nutrition, I always say, is always evolving. And so sometimes you'll hear something and 10 years later we'll come out and say, gosh, that wasn't correct. And so for a while we thought that if we avoided introducing potential allergenic foods to baby, it would actually protect them. We know the opposite is true now, but that was a belief that was very widely held, and it actually was sort of, quote unquote, shown in various studies. So rice milk was hypoallergenic. It's also fortified in iron. So let's talk for a quick minute about iron needs. Breast milk is not very rich in iron. It's highly absorbable, but it's not very high in iron. And the reason is because your baby in utero stores iron for really the first 4 to 6 months of life. That is enough for them to get all of the iron they need through your breast milk or through formula. And then around 6 months, when they start to eat their own food, they get it through there. And so that's one of the reasons why breast milk isn't very high in iron, because we don't want a ton of iron in our bodies either, right? So too little iron is not helpful. Too much iron is also not helpful. Around 7 to 12 months of life, you need about 11 milligrams of iron. That's a lot of iron, especially if baby is having any type of feeding issues, isn't eating as much. These are small appetites. So we want to sort of make sure we're meeting those needs. Iron fortified cereal, like a rice cereal, is a good way to meet those needs. It is not the only way to meet those needs. It's not even necessarily a food that I would recommend pushing. And that's because I have a lot of issues with rice-based foods for kids. Rice is one of those grains that is just naturally higher. It's the way it's grown, it uptakes more heavy metals from the soil. And that is whether we're talking about conventional or organic rice. It has nothing to do with rice being, how it's farmed. It has to do with sort of the way the soil is and where the rice is. So different regions of rice in the world will have different levels of arsenic content. There are some things post manufacturing you can do to help draw out some of the arsenic, but it's naturally contained sort of in the plant. And so that all being said, if I'm feeding my baby rice products, whether it's rice cereal, rice kind of mums, those teething things, a lot of these foods for babies are really high in rice flour over and over again. That little developing brain is going to be able to handle the arsenic, perhaps that someone who is, a 40-year-old woman is going to be able to metabolize. So all that being said, if you're going to use an infant fortified cereal, I much prefer using something that's going to be oat-based or even a multigrain based. Earth's Best, no affiliation, but does have a few options that are not rice-based. So if you feel like you're needing to help boost up those iron stores, it is an okay food to add to the diet that way, but I would really highly recommend against doing a rice-based one. And again, you can also get iron through whole foods.
Yes. And that brings me to my favorite thing that I know that you love too. All right, let's try to keep this one short because I know you literally could probably go on for an hour about this.
I know I'm so long-winded. There's just so many things where I'm like, I think it's so important to be like, this is why these things are talked about, because I think sometimes people hear these things and it's like, well, if we understand the why behind it, it makes more sense. So I apologize.
Totally.
I'm such
No,
a
but so
rambler.
so let's, because I want everybody to buy your book. Let's talk a little bit. What are your favorite tips on baby-led weaning?
Oh, I love baby-led weaning. I
Yeah.
love baby-led weaning. So lots of things I will say is baby-led weaning is the idea that introducing sort of like table foods, solid foods right away. I know that can sound perhaps scary, but I like to reassure all parents that this is likely how we were at first introduced to solids, right? I mean, likely we weren't eating purees. That was sort of an invention in the 19th century. So at some point, and also we know innately how to eat. So a baby-led wean, I think, really gets back to that. It also helps baby regulate their intake right from the beginning, which I spent a lot of time in my career before I was doing pediatrics in eating disorders, in sports nutrition. And so really, I think having an understanding of how much food your body needs is such a critical lesson. And to know that right off the bat is amazing. Have fun with it. I think that sometimes there's so much information out there, and I'm guilty of doing it too. But feeding baby is so fun. It's such an enjoyable time for you, for them. Food before one isn't necessarily completely true because you do need some nutrition. But yeah, food should be fun. We should be giving our babies different types of foods and textures and exploring them. I spent a lot of time with my daughter and my son really introducing all these sort of various foods and also flavors. Babies can enjoy flavors. They don't have to have these bland foods. My daughter loves, chili powder on her sweet potatoes and cinnamon and curry powder. And I think that, the more that you introduce these flavors, especially in sort of this like honeymoon phase where baby's acceptance for new foods and new textures and new flavors is at an all-time high, likely will help reduce, not necessarily prevent, but reduce picky eating down the road.
I love it. I love it. And one of the tips that Dr. Yami gave, um,
Oh, we
that I
love
know you
Dr.
know
Yummy.
her, she said, to introduce bitters as early as you can,
Yeah.
like brassicas and like which are in the broccoli and cauliflower and stuff like that. Things that are not maybe as lovely to the palate.
Yeah.
First
Well,
off,
and
like,
and we're naturally designed to want sweet foods. I mean, breast milk, if anyone's ever tasted it, is very sweet.
yes,
We are designed to crave sweet foods. A lot of it, again, like I said before, with that nausea, bitter foods in nature, a lot of times were poisonous or had compounds we didn't want to consume a lot of, especially in infancy and in periods of growth. So if I'm sort of wired to want that sweet food, the more bitter foods I can introduce around, like, it's usually 5 to 7 months is sort of the optimal window, the more that baby is going to be programmed to sort of like foods. The last thing I will say about this too, because I hear this a lot from parents when they're introducing solids, we get this question is, I gave my baby this food. They made a face. I don't think they like it. Well, we make a lot of faces when we're introduced to new things. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't like it, but keep offering. The more that we offer, the more that we continue, and in a pushy way, but just continuing to put it on the plate, the more likely it is to be accepted. If, and I get it too, if your baby kind of makes a face, you might think, oh, they don't like it, I'm not going to give it to them again. No, it's just new. We need to keep offering it. And that's really how you develop that palate.
totally. Love it. All right. So let's go back a little bit to protein. You already
Yeah.
touched on it, but because of the outdated reputation that plant-based living has received from literally decades past, most people are still concerned about getting enough protein for themselves and their kids if they are vegan or plant-based exclusively. So what are your top tips for overcoming this fear?
Yeah, I think honestly, just knowledge is power. A lot of the hesitancy and the fear around protein and plant-based diets is the myth of a complete versus an incomplete protein. So a long time ago, in the 70s, 80s, and actually, I mean, I went to school in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even then it was promoted that like we need to combine these plant proteins. That is a myth. So
Totally. Yeah.
broccoli, people would say things like you have to have whole grain bread and peanut butter in order to get all of your quote unquote essential amino acids. We do need essential amino acids. That is true from the diet. We can get them exclusively through plant-based foods, and you do not need to combine them to do that. So for instance, broccoli. Broccoli contains all of the amino acids, but you're right. It doesn't contain enough of them in one sitting to be considered to getting all of your amino acids. That is not a problem. Your body is able to have an amino acid pool that it's going to take, your broccoli from lunch, it's going to take your beans from dinner, and it's going to make all of the essential amino acids you need. Technically, you could eat nothing but broccoli all day long and still get all of your essential amino acids. You just need a lot to do it, and no one's going to do that. So I think some of the fear comes around this idea of like you're not getting a complete protein, or meat somehow is a better source of protein, but that's just not true. The other thing that I will say that I think is really important to focus on is that meat contains protein, yes, of course. It also contains other compounds. So do plants. The compounds that are in meat, things like heme iron, isn't always beneficial. Dioxins, we talked about some of that with the fish. Plant-based proteins do not contain that. And they also contain things like fiber. They contain antioxidants. It's food is synergistic. We don't just eat macronutrients. We eat food in its whole state, and you're getting the things that you're getting so many other compounds, not just protein, when you choose between, let's say, a piece of, beef or a bean.
Yeah, I love that. Just put that variety in your diet. The protein is there. Eat a plethora of good plant foods. You should be good.
Yeah. And I will
Uh,
say, sort of, too, just last thing on like toddlers, because I hear this sometimes too, like doctors will say things like, you really need to focus on protein. Yes, of course, protein is important, right? We need protein for periods of growth, especially. But let's say the average toddler needs 18 grams of protein. I mean, if my son's drinking, let's say 2 cups of let's just say fortified soy milk alone, that's 16 grams of protein. I mean, that right there, he's obviously eating a lot more. He's eating, oatmeal and whole grains. It means, but I've never once been worried about him getting enough protein.
yeah, awesome. Good to know. Okay. So, kind of a loaded last question and shifting away from kids nutrition, let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that postnatal period. Um, and I just get this question a lot. So this is kind of, again, loaded, but I'm a personal fan of intuitive eating and listening to exactly what my body is, asking me to feed
Yep.
it. And that's just when I feel my best. And I know that you talk to women about them finding their happy weight versus their ideal weight. And I
Yes.
think this all ties together really well with, intuitive eating and that postnatal period. Can you explain what you mean when you're talking to people about finding their happy weight versus their ideal weight? And maybe words of encouragement for the women who are having issues dropping those last few pounds after having baby.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to acknowledge that your body changes after baby, and you may not, just for lots of shifts and hormones and lifestyle. I mean, God, before I had my kids, it was nothing. I would go to a yoga class every single morning. I had time. I have 2 kids under 4. I do not have that luxury anymore. I mean, it's sort of just like every man for themselves the first few hours of breakfast and getting everyone ready to go out. I mean, so I think there's a lot of grace needs to be given. The other thing I will say too is that your body may not be what it once was, and that's also okay. Pregnancy is incredible. Giving life, giving birth is amazing. My body is so capable of bringing 2 children to the world, and my hips have changed. My bone structure has changed. My ligaments have changed. I am not sort of that narrow waisted, narrow hipped person that I was before, and so no matter how much quote unquote weight I lose, my body has changed. I think that's really important for women to sort of embrace and just sort of acknowledge how amazing their bodies are and how capable they are. I think when it comes to finding your happy weight, I sort of call my happy weight as a weight that I'm happy at. I know that sounds so simplistic, but for a lot of my 20s, and I think a lot of us go through these phases. I was so focused on having this like perfect body. I was really focused on calories. I would exercise a lot. And I truly don't think that I was happy around food. And what I mean by that is if I went out to, for a date night with my husband, I would not look at the menu and say, what sounds good to me? What do I want to eat? I would sort of look at it and be like, what am I allowed to eat? What's food is going to be quote unquote the healthiest? And I was just really obsessed with this sort of idea of healthy. And that is not healthy. It is not healthy to be so obsessed with health all of the time because, life should be enjoyed. I want to go out and have a glass of wine. I want to get dessert sometimes too. Those are really important things that make quote unquote eating enjoyable and a worthwhile experience. And so for me, finding my quote unquote happy weight means, yeah, I'm not going to be at my ideal body weight based on a calculation in insurance magazine, but I'm going to be happy. And, for me, that also means, yes, I work out, I like to run. That makes me happy. That is stress relief. I've really shifted that feeling of I've got to go run this morning because I have to go burn calories from, I need a stress relief. I need a break. I need me time. Yoga is my time to just focus on myself and breathe and, not worry about all the other things I worry about so much throughout the day. And so I think really having this shift, I think sometimes that comes with age too. But anyways, just for anyone who's in that state, I really encourage intuitive eating. That's a big part of it. But also just acknowledging what your body has done and where you're at currently in your life.
Oh, I love it. Give yourself grace and um yeah, I mean just really acknowledge how much life you've given and how much, not only your life, but now you've created another life. And
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, your body's going to change.
Yeah,
So,
and it's amazing. I mean, women are incredible. Like I think about like what my body was able to do to bring in these two beautiful babies, and I think birth is the most beautiful experience. And just, I mean, it's hard, but it's incredible, and it's just this out of body, just like, I mean, I can't even explain it. It's wonderful. And my husband can't do that. I mean, that is
yeah.
amazing. And I think really taking the time to acknowledge like how incredible our bodies are to be able to shift and adapt and not worrying so much about getting back into a size that may or may not be there for you after you've had children.
And just one little note on that too. I think that it's also super important to give ourselves grace uh, because we as moms are put under so much stress.
Yeah.
And that is super, that's also difficult on the body. Like that is
Mhm.
hard on the body. And so we have to remember all that we are doing.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
okay, Alex, so we could talk all day, I feel, but I want to know I want to know more about where we can find you. How can we stay connected? Any resources that you want to guide us to, feel free to.
Yeah, awesome. So you can find me over at Plant-Based Juniors if you're sort of interested more in some of the things we were talking about, especially as it comes to feeding infants, pregnancy. Like I mentioned, we are a very inclusive community. So if you're hearing this and you're thinking, but I'm not a vegan parent, great. Come on over. We still have a very, I feel like, welcoming message for everyone. Our mission is really to help get more plants on the plate and then also provide nutrition guidance. Our book, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler, is coming out May 18th. And we have a ton of free resources on our website. So we've got our free supplement guide. We've got our, guides on how to talk to your pediatrician, how to talk to your OBGYN. We have handouts on milks, on fertility. So ideally, if you have a question around it, we've got some type of blog post or reference on it. And then you can also find me over on Delish Knowledge. It's sort of my personal blog. And I do a lot of recipes. I think I've got like 1,000 different plant-based or plant-forward recipes on that website. So come
Wow,
find me over there.
that is a lot of recipes, my friend. You are just cranking them out, but I know you love to create, which is
I
amazing.
do.
So, okay, friend, this is the last question that I ask everybody that comes on the show, because this is something that I stand for. And I think every single person has a different definition too. So,
Mm.
Alex, what does it mean to live a holistic life?
I think to me, it really means being in line with your values. I think that when I am purchasing food, when I'm purchasing products, I really try to think about what values are really important to me and letting that sort of be my driver when it comes to the things that I choose for me and my family.
Oh, I love that. Goodness gracious, that's so powerful. Vote with your dollars, my friends.
Yes, that's what it is,
That's what you're
right? If
saying.
it's
I
if it's
love it.
important to me, I'm going to choose it that way. Yeah.
Heck yeah, friend. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and everybody's going to love this info.
Thank you. Thanks for
Be
having me.
well.